1 hour later!
So after having a fantastic time in London with Jason for 2 days, I then headed up to Glasgow, which distance-wise is kind of like flying from San Francisco to Los Angeles, except when you arrive, you know you're in someplace completely different. You know you're in the right place when the local advertisements is whiskey. So Roy and I met up in Glasgow and headed over to Oranmore, formerly Calvinside Parish Church in the west side of Glasgow, for a bit of breakfast. So the building maintains some of the original features of the church, such as stained glass windows, but it definitely has a new bar and restaurant feel on the inside. It was here that Roy introduced me to the traditional Scottish breakfast, which includes such things as sausage, bacon, beans, toast, tomatoes, and of course, haggis and a cup of coffee. Normally I wouldn't discuss the hotel I stayed in, but Roy recommended that I stay at the Hotel du Vin in Glasgow, which really beams of Scottish charm. It really exudes old world class in its architecture and has a really great whiskey bar. And on my second night in Glasgow, I met Roy and his wife at the restaurant for dinner, and afterwards we enjoyed a few drams from the whiskey bar. From this lovely hotel, I did a live show with Roy in which we discussed my first impressions of Scotland, but unfortunately it was deleted accidentally from YouTube.
2 weeks later.
But 2 weeks later, at the end of my trip, I met up with Roy again and was able to go live on his YouTube channel, and we talked about my exploration of the Lowlands, Islay, the Highlands, and Speyside.
Hello, whiskey folk. It's Roy Aqvavitae. Apologies for being late, but we've had a bit of a hardware meltdown here. So obviously, the gentleman sitting here to my right-hand side is my friend from California, Erik Waite. And just to give you a bit of a backstory, a bit of a backdrop about Erik, for those that don't know who Erik is, well, historically, he's a wine guy. He was into wine. And then due to his wine studies and extending those studies and getting into spirits and things like that, he had an epiphany. He had a moment with a Macallan 12-year-old some time ago, and it completely changed his horizons and outlooks in terms of spirits. And he's now really, really enjoying whiskey, to the point that his channel now is more than 50% whiskey, I would say, right? Yeah. And 2 weeks ago, he arrived in Scotland to do a tour of Scottish distilleries. And I think you're knocking on for 20 plus distilleries that you visited in the last 2 weeks.
And if I didn't have to go back to work, I would just keep on going.
So even after all of that, he doesn't seem to be whiskeyed out.
On my first day in Scotland, after eating a hearty Scottish breakfast, we took a subway to a train station, bought some orange tickets for a train, which then took us from Glasgow to Edinburgh. A couple days later, I would make the trip from Glasgow to Edinburgh again, but in a rental car. When I drove, the trip was about 46 miles and took an hour and 15 minutes, but I had to allow myself at least 2 hours in order to find a parking spot and walk to my final destination at the Scotch Whisky Experience. The advantage of the train ride was it gave Roy and I the opportunity to see a bit of the countryside of the Beltway of Scotland that would not be visible from the freeway. It also allowed us to talk and not worry about how much whiskey we would enjoy in Edinburgh, and his wife was kind enough to pick us up from the station in Glasgow when we returned. Edinburgh is a beautiful city. You'll find many old churches, such as St. Giles Cathedral, street performing bagpipers, and a long flight of stairs to Edinburgh Castle, as well as many whiskey shops and the Scotch Whisky Experience. At the Scotch Whisky Experience, you'll meet Douglas McIntyre, the local ghost, who moves about the portraits in the building and loves to tell people all about whiskey. We took a ride in a whiskey barrel through the Scotch Whisky Experience, which is a little quirky and Disneyland-like, but it is informative and is great for tourists. Here is a video I took during our ride.
I'm soaked through. Still, I mustn't complain. Fresh water is, after all, a vital ingredient in the art of making Scotch whisky. Aqua vitae, or in Gaelic, whiskey bar, the water of life. Another vital ingredient is barley, which is steeped in water and brought here to the malting house to germinate. The malt man turns the barley, allowing it to breathe and sprout. Can you no smell that? That, my friends, is the sweet smell of malted barley being dried here in the kiln. More specifically, it's the smell of burning peat. Now, peat is a young form of coal and another factor in determining a whisky's unique final flavour. Is it just me? Or is it getting a wee bit hot in here? Oh, it's yourself. I was just having a wee breather. A bit like the malt here in the malt store, you might say. It's, waiting. It's biding its time, building up its strength a wee bit. Oh well, that's it. Onwards and upwards. Well, downwards anyway. This is the milling machine. This is where the malt gets rudely awakened, crushed, ground and pulverized into what's known in the trade as grist. It's awfully noisy in here, but it's all part of an ongoing process, all a means to an end. Oh, it gets everywhere, this stuff. Oh, shite, bichte. This is the mash tun, a container where we mix together the purest Scottish water with our grist from the mill. The sugar in the mixture is dissolved, producing a sweet liquid known as wort. The wort is then cooled, ready for the next stage. The residue left in the mash tun can be used to make animal feed. The wort might not look that special, but let me assure you, this will become pure liquid gold. So what, I hear you ask, is the one magical ingredient which helps turn a malty, sugary wort into something with, well, let's say, a wee bit more of a kick to it? Well, the answer is right here. This is yeast. The importance of this microscopic yet explosive living organism simply cannot be underestimated. Amazing! And this is where the magic truly begins. This is the wash bag, where yeast meets wort and sugar turns to alcohol in a process known as fermentation. A heaving maelstrom of heat and foam. And if the whole thing threatens to get out of hand and overspill, yawn switcher blades above will keep the whole thing in check. And don't be taking too deep a breath in here, by the way. The vapors produced can fair pack a punch. The alcohol content at this point is still too low and needs to be increased. We do this during distillation. Now, pay attention. The liquid is heated in a pot still, and because alcohol boils at a lower temperature, it separates from the water. The vapour rises up the neck and is cooled and condensed back into a liquid by a copper coil immersed in cold water, known as the worm. Here we see the cooling and condensing process in action. The liquid is now known as low wines, but it needs to be distilled again to further increase its alcohol content. And that takes place here, in the spirit still. Each distillery has its own unique shape of copper pot still. Another factor in ensuring that each distillery produces its own unique flavour of Scotch whisky. By now, the liquid is so strong it has to be kept under lock and key by customs and excise. Here in the spirit safe, the still man weaves his magic by judging precisely when to send the first part of the run, or 4 shots, and the last part of the run, or feint, back to be distilled again. Meanwhile, the middle cut, or heart of the run, is sent to the spirit receiver. But it's still not Scotch whisky. Oh no, not for a long while yet. These casks won't see the light of day for at least 3 years, some not for 12 or even 50 years. During this period of maturation, a whisky's unique final flavour is further enhanced by the wood of the cask that it's stored in. Its clear colour changed to a golden hue. What was once nothing more than barley and water magically matures into Scotch whisky. Ah, the sweet smell of evaporating whisky. Up to 2% each year just disappears. The angels share, they call it. Ah well, I'm away to join the angels myself. Slanjava.
After the ride, we toured the Scotch Whisky Experience Whisky Collection, which comprises 3,384 bottles of Scotch whisky, making it a priceless record of whisky history. The collection is held in a marble and glass vault, and we enjoyed a wee dram of Scotch whisky within its golden glow. Then we enjoyed a few drams at the Amber Cafe. Then we headed over to the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, of which Roy is a member, for lunch and a few more drams of whiskey. Then we took a train from Glasgow back to Edinburgh, where Roy's wife kindly met us at the station. Alright, so thus far I haven't been to any distilleries in my trip, in my videos. Spent 2 days in London, hung out with Roy from Aqvavitae in Glasgow and Edinburgh. So I thought I'd share a little bit of my learning experience in planning my trip, particularly in the use of transportation. So basically you have 3 options. You can take a tour bus. There are a couple different companies that do tours. You can take a train to and from Edinburgh and Glasgow, as we did in this video. There's also one that will head north and get up into the Highlands and Speyside. And then, of course, you can get a rental car as well. I use a combination of the tour bus and a rental car. I used the tour bus to go to Islay, which will be coming up. But I used a rental car to go to the Highlands and Speyside. And then Roy and I together took a cab along with Uber and a train for our trip back and forth to Glasgow and Edinburgh. And I really think I utilized all 3 of these really well and made really good choices. So Scottish Roots is the tour bus that I use to get to Islay. If you go to their website, and this is not an advertisement for Scottish Roots, They have several different tours. They have a one-day malt whiskey and draft beer tour, which I really wasn't interested in. They have a one-day Speyside tour. They have a 4-day Speyside tour. And then they have a 4-day Islay tour. And then you can also sort of create your own custom tour if you have a large enough group. So if you've got 10 friends or whatever, and you're going to need probably at least 10, and you want to do a special trip that they're going to customize for you, you can do that as well. But keep in mind, you're going to need a whole lot of people to be joining along with you. If you're considering going up to the Highlands or Speyside, and if you look at their Speyside tour, they have pre-programmed for you what distilleries you're going to go, where you're going to stay, and so forth. You may look at that list of distilleries and go, well, those aren't the ones I want to go to, in which case you're really not going to be able to use their services. But if you had 10 people who were going to travel with you, say a bunch of friends or your whole family or whatever, then you could customize a tour. The 4-day trip to Islay was absolutely fantastic. And you go from, as you're going to see in the future video, from Edinburgh across Scotland, work your way up to Deanston, and then Oban. And then there, shortly after there, you're going to catch a ferry, which is then going to take you around to Islay, and then you're going to hit all the distilleries in Islay that are currently there, probably with the exception of maybe a Bowmore. Roy and I took a train from Edinburgh, to Glasgow to Edinburgh. As you saw in the video, we first met up for breakfast, then we walked, I don't know, maybe half a mile or so to a subway. We then took the subway to the train station. We took the train station to Edinburgh, spent the day walking around Edinburgh, and then had a bunch of whiskeys along the way. And then we took the train, as I said, back to Glasgow, and his wife picked us up from there. The advantage of using the train is we could kind of relax, talk to each other, hang out, and we really didn't need to be concerned about how many whiskeys we had along the way, so long as we could walk and remain coherent, which we did. The disadvantage was there's a lot more lag time when using public transportation. You could also take a train from Edinburgh to head up north to go to distilleries up north. But when you're planning your trip, and I packed in 20 distilleries in 2 weeks. I packed a lot of distilleries in there. When you're using public transportation, your lag time is greater. Your ability to get from one point to another is going to take longer. You're just not going to be able to see as much or visit as many distilleries. So there's a cost benefit there as to what you're choosing. So I used the tour bus to go to Islay because you could just sort of relax. They plan everything. They set everything. They set up the hotels. They got everything set up. So it takes out a lot of the management and scheduling that you have to do. The tour guide was absolutely, and bus driver was absolutely awesome. Really well educated, really informed, really passionate about whiskey. He could also point out a lot of historical sites along the way and point out things that I would not have even recognized. He was also very knowledgeable about the individual distilleries and could tell you about it. So it was really not just a guy who's showing you around or providing a means of transportation, but really an instructor. And he took us to some historical sites, which I'll tie into some of my distillery videos, which will be coming up. So I can't highly recommend enough Scottish routes for going to Islay. Now you're going to travel with a group of others, unless you rent out the entire bus just for yourself and some friends. So you're going to meet some people along the way as well. Taking the train and then Uber, if you have an Uber app, or taking a cab, works, I think, between Edinburgh and Glasgow. I don't think it's going to work as well if you're trying to head north. You're getting a little bit more out into the countryside. Edinburgh and Glasgow, you're in the city. Taxis and Ubers are more readily available. When you go up into the Highlands, you go up into Speyside, you are, in a sense, going out into the sticks. You're out into the countryside. You don't have all the same conveniences that you might in a more urban area. So using the train, Uber, taxi cab combo worked really well for Glasgow and Edinburgh when I was with Roy. The tour bus worked really, really well for going to Isla, but I had a rental car that I took north with me. In fact, I had a rental car from the very beginning. Roy's wife dropped him off at the airport. We met at the airport. We then got my rental car, but we left my rental car at my hotel during our trip to Edinburgh so that we could just sort of chill out, talk, and enjoy a bunch of whiskeys for the day, which I think was a really good idea, mostly on Roy's part. But once we got back and I had parted and I went on with the rest of my trip, I did use a rental car, which has its own challenges, but also its excitement and sort of adding to the journey. One is, unless you're used to driving on the other side of the road, if you're from the United States, North America, or some other country where we drive on the right side of the road and we sit on the left side of the automobile, it can be a little unnerving, but if I can do it, you can do it. It took me about 2 days to really sort of get settled in on driving on the other side of the road, the other side of the automobile. You tend to be super intentional in everything you do. It's not just like jumping in your car at home and going to the grocery store where you know your way and just kind of chill out and relax. And the only time it was really challenging, I found, was when you're coming out of a parking lot, which doesn't have divided lanes, and you didn't really have to focus and remind yourself that you need to drive on the left side of the road. Most of the time, if you have a car in front of you, you can just sort of focus on them and follow them. So freeways aren't that big of a deal because you have divided highway and lanes of traffic. The second thing is the roundabouts. If you're not used to those,
we love roundabouts here. Love them. Turn left onto roundabouts and give way to vehicles on your right.
When I got my rental car, I asked the person I rented the car from, does it have GPS? Now, you could use the onboard GPS and satellite navigation on the automobile, or I found I also could use my iPhone with Siri. And so when you're driving along, you can sort of just see there's a little blue line or whatever color it has on a map. And when you go to a roundabout and you get that circle is either going to go halfway around, a quarter of the way around, three-quarters of the way around. So you know how far you need to go in the roundabout just by seeing where the circle goes. And since you're following it along, pretty easy to go, okay, the next one is where I get off. Since you're traveling on the road and you may have cars in front of you and you know, okay, it's the third turnoff on the runabout, if you're seeing cars go ahead of you going through the runabout, you can know, okay, that silver van just took the third turnoff or the second turnoff. I'm going to follow that silver van and go along. So the only time I found roundabouts to be challenging was in heavy traffic. So when you get out of the main city and get a little bit more out to the countryside, they're really not that big a deal. And I actually found that they kind of make sense. They seem to keep traffic going fairly well. And should you miss your little turnoff, you didn't get off of the second one, you accidentally missed it, you can always come back around and get it the next time. Probably the biggest challenges in dealing with the runabouts are the large trucks. They can be a little aggressive and domineering in the roundabouts. Alrighty, so what about then visiting distilleries and enjoying whiskeys? All of the distilleries I found to be super conscientious about the driving status of their visitors. And now if you're with a tour group, they're not going to bother to ask because they know you're with a tour group. Someone else is driving the bus. But if you're on your own and you're driving a car and they know it, and you're going to get provided several drams, then they don't want to be responsible for you getting behind the wheel and getting in an accident. The drunk driving laws there are extremely stringent, even more so than the United States. So what do? Well, you will either be offered whiskey in a dram, in a glass, and then you can smell and taste just a teensy-weensy bit, and then the rest of it, maybe put into a little sample tube like this, or a little jars. I'll put a picture right here. We can kind of see the example of the little jars that were issued. And so you're still smelling a little bit, tasting just a little bit, but the most of what you're going to consume is going to be perhaps back in your hotel. And I didn't mind that. So I would tour a distillery for the day. I would bring home some samples as well as any purchases I might have bought at the distillery. And I'll cover buying and shipping whiskey in another video. And bringing home those treasures from Scotland. But I found I kind of liked getting back to the hotel for the evening, because I'm traveling by myself, having dinner, and then just sort of chilling out in the evening, because the sun stays up long in the summertime in Scotland, and be able to just sort of enjoy a whiskey at home. So I smelled the taste just a little bit while I was there at the distillery, and then had more when I got back to my hotel. Alrighty. So again, the final option is to create your own. So I think that would be an awesome way to go. If a bunch of whiskey tubers wanted to get together and travel to Scotland, that would be absolutely fantastic. And I'd be all up for checking that out as well. All right, so I think that's about it for different options of travel. So my recommendation would be, and this is going to depend whether you're traveling by yourself or traveling with a group, definitely the tour bus to Islay, I think, is the way to go. It's just, I think that's absolutely fantastic. Now, you could, if you wanted to go to Islay and you're shorter on time, you could fly straight into Glasgow and then catch a plane, a little hopper, that'll fly it to Islay. That'll save you a lot of hours, and your very first day, you can go to Glasgow and then to Islay. But it's a very small plane and a very small airport, so you need to be comfortable flying in really small planes. But then from there, there are taxi cab services and so forth on Islay, but they're just going to be people who are going to be driving you from point A to point B and to get you where to go to the distilleries. I liked the tour guide. I learned a lot more about Islay from him. It's having him as a tour bus driver / instructor. It was just really, really, really good. But if you're shorter on time, it's a good way to go. And if you've been to Islay, perhaps even, and maybe visited a couple of distilleries, and so that you don't need to do the whole tour, which I want to go back to Islay. I didn't tour Beaumar. I saw it. I was around it. And there are a couple other distilleries, such as Ardenhoe, which they'll be opening up within the next couple of years. Port Ellen will be reopening within the next couple of years. So I do plan on going back. So I'm not going to want to do the whole tour bus thing. So then the other option is to fly then and then use cabs or Uber that they have there. The services on Islay are really, really, I think, geared well for tourism, because that's where a lot of their money is coming in for people who are living there. Everything is based around the distillery business there. All the families and so forth, everything is just rooted around that. And then there's the hotels, restaurants, and all the rest of that. Taking a train up to the Highlands and Speyside, if you wanted to avoid a rental car, it's certainly an option. But I think unless you have a lot more time, you're going to be there for several weeks. You're going to be there for a month. And so you're not in a hurry. I had 2 weeks to do everything I wanted to do. I think that's another good way to go. You're going to enjoy the countryside. You're going to be able to relax and look out your window. But just realize you're going to have a lot more lag time. And the scheduling of going to distilleries can be fairly tight. So a lot of their scheduling times for when they have tours are going to be overlapping with other nearby distilleries. Their ability to finish a distillery and then within a half an hour get to another one, if you don't have your own car, is going to be really, really challenging unless you've got someone sitting there in the parking lot just waiting for you to take you over there. So just bear that in mind. It's just, you've just got that lag time. I'm accustomed to driving myself everywhere. I don't use a whole lot of public transportation here in California. So I found the ability to just immediately jump into an automobile and to go to the next distillery to be really helpful. And I did enjoy the driving experience. It was part of the adventure of driving around the Highlands and Speyside. So everything's got pros and cons. You can be maybe a little more relaxed with public transportation. You're going to have more lag time. You're going to have a little more difficulty dealing with your schedules. But you're not going to have to worry about consuming whiskey. On the other hand, using a rental car, you're going to have to deal with the driving on the other side of the road issues. Obviously, you're going to have to limit yourself in consumption. In terms of getting lost, that was a concern, because I've been in a foreign place. But the site navigation, even if you can't get internet access, the site navigation I found on my rental car and to be able to link into that with my iPhone worked extremely well. Siri on my iPhone worked really, really well for getting me everywhere. I had no problems whatsoever in traveling around. All right, so let me pour myself a little dram. This is from Cardew. This is a special cask reserve, which, of course, is up in the Highlands, fairly close to Macallan. Really, really, really nice. All right, so if you happen to have any questions, if you're planning a trip, feel free to leave a message down below, and if I should see your message, I will respond and try to help as much as possible. If you happen to catch me on a live stream, I might be able to answer questions there. If you follow me on Facebook, you can also send me a message through Facebook. Just look up my name, Erik, Aqvavitae, on Facebook. You could follow me on there and send me a message from there as well. And I'll try to do the best I can to offer any suggestions and provide any tips. So I've, in addition to really, really enjoying the trip and visiting 20 different distilleries within 2 weeks, I think I also did some really good reconnaissance and learning about how to navigate around Scotland. All right, until next time, my next video will be on my visit and tour of Glengoyne, where I took a master class, and you're going to want to stay tuned for that. Till next time, cheers. If you have benefited from my wine or whiskey studies and you wish to support this ongoing work, I ask that you become a Patreon supporter. The link to my Patreon account is in the description box below.